Hey, what's up, Raider Nation? It's been a crazy, let's say, 72 hours because not only did Pete Carroll get fired, the Raiders secured the number one overall pick, and the Raiders beat the Chiefs, but also John Spytek addressed the media. We're going to get into all of that today and lots more. Remember, in that final segment, if you're watching on YouTube, it's questions with Q and Link. So make sure to get those questions and comments in.
72. I like that. I like that number 72, Raider Nation. Don't dim my shine. I am high as a kite right now because the Raiders are 1-0 in 2026. And you know what? We beat the Chiefs. We'll talk about that and everything that transpired over the last 72 hours right here on the Squad Show.
I see what you did there, Big Link. I'm excited, man. Excited about it. Raider Nation, Q Myers here. And now we know what the football operations look like. We know who's making the decisions when it comes to putting this Raiders roster together. That will break down as well here on the Raider Squad Show. Let's get it.
Raider Nation, it's time. This is the Raiders Squad. Everything Las Vegas Raiders every week. Covering all the big hits and game-changing plays from the Death Star in the desert. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Commitment to excellence starts here. The Raiders Squad Show starts now.
Hey, what's up, Raider Nation? Remember, if you like the content, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. You can also follow us on our social media channels. You'll see on the screen, if you're watching this on YouTube, the ways that you can connect with us, and also in the description below if you are listening to this on the audio side, because you can find us on the audio side as well. So wherever you find your shows and podcasts, we're there as well. Just want to mention the Locked On Network is the #1 sports podcasting network. Also, we do appreciate you for helping the channel grow, helping the show grow. So whether you make Locked On Raiders your first listen of the day and the Squad Show your second listen of the day, we do appreciate you. Lots to get into on today's episode. I mentioned in the intro, in that final segment, if you're watching this on YouTube, Link and Q will be taking some of your questions and comments. So we'll save that for the final segment of the show. We're also obviously going to be talking about the #1 overall pick and if Fernando Mendoza is the clear-cut #1. But so much has happened since Sunday. And shout out to Q and Link for saying, let's do the show on Tuesday, not Monday, because both of them knew that everything was going to go down probably on Monday if something was to go down. And it definitely did, because Pete Carroll was relieved of his duties. And I want to actually read out what the Mark Davis had sent out on social media. And he said, quote, "The Las Vegas Raiders have relieved Pete Carroll of his duties as head coach. We appreciate and wish him and his family all the best. Moving forward, General Manager John Spytek will lead all football operations in close collaboration with Tom Brady, including the search for the club's next head coach. Together, they will guide football decisions with a shared focus on leadership, culture, and alignment with the organization's long-term vision and goals." So lots there just in that message. And we'll get into John Spytek and how he addressed the media. Q and Link were all over it. I mean, I was seeing them on the videos of, where John Spytek was addressing the media. But let's get into everything first. Pete Carroll relieved of his duties, one and done, right? This was a guy that was on a 3-year deal. I believe the 4th year was an option, and now he's done after 1 season. We'll go with you first, Link. Just your thoughts, and did you kind of see this coming?
In the words of one of the great comedians, I didn't like it, but I understood. I kind of figured that this stuff was going to happen coming down. I know Mark Davis has had a past. If the coaches don't win, we're going to let you go. We're going to move on from you. And the reason why I didn't like it is because there's been no pillar of stability. But with that being said, it's highly enticing to go out and look for a possible new coach with the #1 overall draft choice, meaning hoping that you can get it right. Now, my biggest concern is, is Spytek prepared for a job? He's only had 1 year of being a general manager. He was an assistant before then. Is he prepared for this type of responsibility? And how much involvement is Tom Brady? That's my biggest concern. Like I said, I didn't like it, but I understood. Now, going forward, it's anyone's guess where they're going to go. And we're going to talk about it later in the show. But, I saw Pete Carroll at the facility and I said, hey, coach, good, shook his hand and said, wish him the best. He's a future Hall of Famer. There's no doubt in my mind. He's built programs wherever he was. I didn't think he had a fair shake to build programs. But in all honesty, I didn't think he was given a fair chance because he wasn't the decision maker. There were many decisions that were made around him, which I don't think is fair. So, again, I didn't like it, but I understood.
Right. No, I'm right there with you. I didn't find it as a surprise at all. I actually expected it to happen. Again, that's kind of the reason why we all decided as a collective to push the show back to Tuesday, just because we wanted to make sure we had as much information as possible. Kind of felt like the writing was on the wall for a while. When you're a 3-win team, that's what's going to happen. But the biggest thing was not just the 3 wins. It was the fact that nobody was on the same page. And Shantelle, you read the statement. And I think that statement, even though it was only a couple lines, told you all that you need to know. Right now, Spytek and Brady are going to lead in football operations, and they're going to have the shared vision, right? I mean, there's certain words in there that kind of let you know that Pete Carroll, John Spytek, Chip Kelly at the time, nobody was on the same page, and that's the biggest problem. If Pete Carroll had just gone in there, they were on the same page with John Spytek, their timeline was all lined up correctly. They all shared the same vision where it was, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to lay the foundation this year. We're going to build. Then we look like year 2, year 3, we're going to be a team that should be, a playoff team. If they had all had the same vision and same plan and timeline, I think that Pete Carroll could have stuck around. But clearly, and it was pretty clear early on, I think it was week 4, week 5, we started realizing hold on, man. What looked like it could be something good, there's trouble in paradise. This is not exactly, what it's supposed to look like. And I keep going back to when I asked Pete Carroll at the press conference, I will never forget what he said and the way he said it when I asked him about getting Geno Smith comfortable in this Chip Kelly offense. I said, what has to happen for Geno to get comfortable? And he looked at me, kind of gave me a little side eye and said, no, he ain't calling the plays now. And when he said it like that, and again, that will always ring in my head. Like, I will never forget that look and the way he said it. And that was a direct message to Chip Kelly, like, hey, man, what Geno's doing out there is what Chip is calling, and it's not what we want to do as a team. That's what I took from it. So they were never on the same page, and that was the biggest disconnect, and that's why the move was necessary. And as Lincoln said, you have the number 1 overall pick. You have plenty of salary cap space. It's time for a clean reset. You've got to go ahead and make the right decisions, bring in the right guy and line them up together and share that same vision. That's the most important thing.
And going back to John Spytek addressing the media, I think one of the most interesting things is that he also took accountability. He didn't all put it on Pete. There was a lot of things that were very interesting about him addressing the media. And I thought that was one of the biggest things. Another thing was the fact that Pete Carroll also alluded to the fact that they weren't seeing eye to eye, him and John Spytek. So that was another thing as well. And we talked so much, I believe, for the last month, who was making the decisions. We kind of know now that John Spytek and Tom Brady are going to be leading these decisions moving forward. But going back to John Spytek addressing the media, what was your biggest takeaway from what he said, Link?
I felt that he was dancing around the question about the future of the assistant coaches, his role, and what he needs to do, and more importantly, he was dancing around the fact of how involved is Tom Brady. Is Tom Brady actually the one making calls? Well, I talked to Tom Brady. Oh, we got a close relationship. We go back to our Michigan days. We're trying to build a program like that. Okay, I get it. You're saying all the right things right now, but dancing around the subject. And look, I understand when you're in a position like that, you can't give your hand away. You got to play your own set of poker hands and kind of dodge around the questions and stuff like that. And there were a lot of good questions from Q and the guys that were in that panel asking direct questions about how did we get to this point? What type of disaster? What to me, I would have, and he did accept responsibility because I think that was part of it. He took responsibility, and that was a big part of it. Look, you have a draft class that you really didn't play. And you're talking about a young, impressionable team that needs a lot of players. Well, now when I go to my evaluation part of the season, which we're in right now, I try to draft what we need and how we can address it. It's going to be interesting. And it's a very small window because not only do you have to worry about getting a head coach, but be mindfully so. You have to decide if you're going to stay with Patrick Graham.
Yep.
You already let Chip Kelly go. So you got to have a head coach and an offensive coordinator. Then you got to begin your evaluation for whatever type of scheme that offensive coordinator is or is going to have. The play caller is going to have. And I don't know if they're there. They've got some good pieces on this team, but there's still a long way to go for where they can be, competitive on the NFL level. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in a short amount of time. And like I said, I didn't like it, but I understood. And I understand where we're going from here, that it's going to be Brady and Spytek's show. It'll be interesting to see what they put together.
I was glad to see that statement where it was specified that it was going to be the Spytek and Brady show. I was glad to see that because there's so many times we've been on this show, other shows, whatever platforms we do, and everyone says, Q, what exactly is Tom Brady's role? And we all speculate on what Tom Brady's role, but, a lot of people have thought, oh, he has nothing to do with this. He's just a minority owner. And others think, oh, he's making all the calls. And, well, Mark Davis let it be known that he is heavily involved. Now, I've said it many times, and I've been this guy before, so I understand why it looks good from the outside, but you can't be a weekend dad, right? You can't be a weekend dad with this when you're trying to put together a roster, right? It's easy to pick up Johnny on Saturday, take him to the movies and pizza, and then drop him off for mom to go and do the heavy lifting throughout the course of the week. He can't do that. He can't be weekend dad. He's got to be able to be hands-on if he's going to be part of this football operations, if he's going to be the guy that's really in charge of putting this thing together in tandem with John Spytek. And so he was asked multiple times about Brady and his involvement. And, he basically let it be known he's not going to be in the building all the time, but he's in constant communication, right? That was my big takeaway from that. So it was basically like, yeah, he's still going to be off campus. He's still not going to be here all the time, but we talk all the time. And so, you can see kind of towards the third or fourth question about Brady, he was getting a little like, okay, I guess we're going to stay on this for a while. You can almost see him getting a little frustrated. The other thing I saw was he was a little nervous. I don't think that he was 100% comfortable with being out there, and I think that's because his role has now increased. I believe when the pecking order started last year, it was Brady, Pete Carroll, and then John Spytek. Now you remove Pete Carroll, and now it's Brady and John Spytek. Again, going back to Mark Davis and what he said, not me putting words in anyone's mouth, reading the statement and understanding what those words mean. Like, those are the two guys that are going to spearhead the charge with the head coach, with football operations in general, right? The buck is going to start and stop with those guys. So, okay, that's what the charge is, that you guys are tasked with that. John Spytek has never done it as a GM by himself. He was assistant GM at Tampa Bay where they did a hell of a job. And Tom Brady's never done it, period. Right? We don't know. I said this to EA on Sunday at the game, before the pregame show started, Lincoln. I said, how do we know Tom Brady's good at this? Right? I live in the world where Michael Jeffrey Jordan is the greatest basketball player to ever play. And I know that's controversial. That's fine. We can argue about that later. But he was a terrible owner. He was a terrible talent evaluator. And I think that if he was given truth serum, he would tell you the truth, but he'll never tell you that. But that's not the point. Like, the point is, just because you were the best at what you did didn't mean that you're going to easily transition into a role of, hey, I can evaluate talent and put a roster together and make this thing a champion. That's my big question is, okay, where's the proof of concept that this is going to work?
And Shantelle and Q, here's my little added tidbit. Tom Brady works for Fox. He's a minority owner. He's a commentator. So there's many ways there's almost a conflict of interest about how much involvement he can have in this overall situation. Okay, if that's the case, and John Spytek is making all the decisions, here's the way it comes down to me, and I approach it logically. If the general manager is going to hire the head coach, he has to give the head coach the leeway to hire the offensive coordinator, right, or hire, the other assistant coaches,
the staff.
and the staff. Exactly. Yep. Right. And then you got to be on the same page. And then the head coach, offensive coordinator, the staff has got to be able to tell the general manager, this is what we need to be forward, to be competitive and going. That's the way it should be. It shouldn't have to be where one guy has to pick up a phone and get clarification. Should we do it this way? Should we do it? Should we go that way? And that's what I thought we had last year. And that's why I thought it was such a disaster. But with that being said, going forward, there's going to be a big microscope on John Spytek because you do have that powerful number one pick. And everyone is expecting to turn things around. And a lot of people were basing it on the situations that teams that struggled the year before this past season and how they turned it around. Well, those teams took their lump. When Chicago drafted Caleb, they took that lump that season before they got Ben Johnson. Now Ben Johnson seems to be a savior because they won the division and they're in the playoffs. You see what I'm saying? Coming into the following year. And same thing with Vrabel up in New England. They drafted Drake May. They took their lumps. Then they figured out their offensive line. Both teams I'm referring to figured out their offensive line, and they were able to turn it around. So the forecast, the way I'm trying to describe it to Raider Nation is, do we get our pick, our quarterback,
right,
for the future? Do we take another year of lumps, and then all of a sudden we turn around and flip it and make it work? I don't think the Raider Nation is patient enough for that. I'm not patient enough for that. I don't want to see them regress like they did this past year and with only 4 wins the year before, then go to 3 wins and struggle to get those 3 wins just to take their lumps to say that they're better. So there's a huge microscope on John Spytek going forward. And I think he's starting to understand there's a lot that's at stake. And there are a lot of people who want to see him turn things around, not only for his, credibility and his legacy, but also the people he's throwing out there that he's working with.
Well, the big thing with that, Lincoln, and you hit it right on the head, and John Spytek kind of referred to that during his presser. Don't expect a Washington turnaround. Don't expect a Jacksonville turnaround. Don't expect, a Patriot turnaround immediately. And he even said he thinks that, those teams could have success, but it might not be sustained. And that's what they're looking for, is sustained success. So he understands the situation. And, what you mentioned about Caleb Williams and the Bears, that's the reason why Pete Carroll got let go. They don't want to be in a situation where possibly they draft their franchise quarterback and then have Pete Carroll coaching them. And then all of a sudden 9 games in, it's like, this ain't working. We're going to go ahead and move on. And then all of a sudden you get another reset. Like they did that in New York with the Giants, right? Jackson Dart's going to be on his second head coach, second play caller, second, offensive scheme. Caleb Williams is on his second head coach, second offensive scheme, second, play caller. And so it's working in Chicago because Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams, they figured it out, and that's great. But why stunt the growth of a young quarterback if you potentially go in that direction? And look, there's no saying that no telling that they're going to go in that direction. They could sit there and evaluate and say, Mendoza's great, but he's not the guy that we're actually looking for. Moore is great, but he's not the guy we're looking for. But hey, the Jets, who's sitting there at number 2, they want to give us a couple extra picks just to move up to go get their guy. So we'll do that. We'll take our lumps. We'll get a couple extra draft picks and we'll try to build that way. I think that they're in that position, Link, where when you're in basketball and you catch the ball and you haven't dribbled, you have options. You can dribble, you can shoot, right? You can pivot, you can do what you want to do. Like you're in a position of, hey man, you don't know what I'm gonna do. I ain't dribbled yet, so I ain't giving myself up. They're not giving themselves up, and I don't think they're gonna give themselves up anytime soon.
You guys make some great points there in terms of, you guys made a lot of points, actually. I want to go back to the point that you made, Q, about Michael Jordan not being the greatest GM and owner. That's been proven,
bad.
But
it was bad.
But the greatest player of all time, I think all three of us would agree on that, hopefully. But I would say,
I ain't trying to start no argument because I know. Look, I'm in the barbershop every week.
There's no argument. There's no argument.
not here, not here.
Not for me either. But
yeah. I know there's a guy that plays for the Lakers where I think the younger generation might say that. But moving back to football, Tom Brady is not proven. And it's really interesting because, Q and Link, you guys cover the team essentially every day. You guys are covering this team every day. You guys know this team, are very close with this team. And we've been doing this show for, since training camp. And now the Raiders are getting that national spotlight. They're on First Take. They're talking about it on PFF. They're talking about it on all these shows. And the big focus is Tom Brady. And they're talking about, does Tom Brady know how to run an organization? Does Tom Brady know how to draft? Tom Brady is not proven, but he needs to know how to run an organization and make those decisions. But I think that there is even pressure on Tom Brady now because we only know Tom to be the GOAT with what he's done on the field. If Tom Brady is not successful in this era, and we know he's doing everything with Fox, do you think there's a possibility where Tom will have to step away from Fox and just focus on the Raiders? We'll go with you first, Link.
Step away from $300 million to focus on a team that, look, he's a minority owner. It's not a majority owner. He's a minority owner. He owns 5%. It doesn't. Look, I don't know what Tom Brady wants to do with his future. I don't know if he wants to be heavily involved in that part. I don't know after his Fox contract runs out if he's going to want to continue to do commentating. I don't know those things. I just know that finally we understand the hierarchy and this is the question that I had all through last year. Who's making the decisions? Who's making the call? And now we see it. And Mark came out and said, "Look, I'm going to let Spytek and Brady do it." Okay, exactly. But that doesn't show me what the future pertains to Tom Brady. I do know a couple of games he didn't even show up in the building, so he was on vacation. I think one in Sandra Pace. I heard about some things, but those are just rumors that I heard. So I'm not sure how his involvement, how it goes from there. I just know that the person I do see making the decisions right now is John Spytek, and he's under a huge microscope to me. Because, again, he was once an assistant general manager. This is really his second year of being a general manager. Last year, I don't even know how to chalk it up as far as evaluation because most of the draft choices didn't play until the end of the year. And I'm under the perspective, I don't believe that you can develop guys on the National Football League level. I think you need to send your scouts and your evaluators out there to say, who's ready to play on this level now? And then when you draft them, because you're using a draft choice to get them, they're out there on the football field. Not holding a clipboard, not sitting on the sidelines, not sitting in street clothes. They're actually on the football field. Now, if you didn't want to play guys, you want to develop guys, to me, that's called free agency. To me, that's called getting a guy a practice squad. That's what you do. You don't use a draft choice on somebody you want to put on the shelf to see if they mature. So that's the microscope I draw on Spytek right now.
Right, and that's where I think the big disconnect was between Spytek and Pete Carroll. I think Spytek was very interested in having those guys, those young guys out there playing, the Caleb Rogers, the Jack Beshes, the Dante Thorntons, all those guys. I think he wanted them playing early, and Pete Carroll was like, no, they're not ready. And I think Pete Carroll was correct about some of those. Even Caleb Rogers has said, I wasn't ready. I mean, those are his words. I wasn't ready. There was things I had to learn and things I had to work on. And then you see him progress. And I think that they have a nice piece in him, but we have to see more. Charles Grant, we definitely didn't see enough of him, so we can't make an assessment of what he brings to the table either. But yeah, it almost feels like this draft class outside of Ashton Genty was almost wasted this year because you didn't have them out there. You didn't have them playing. You didn't have them contributing. And let's be honest about the situation. When you're a 3-win team, what are you losing by having those guys out there, right? What are you doing? And I got all the respect in the world for Tyler Lockett. I think he made a hell of a career out of himself coming out of K-State. But at some point, there's no reason for Tyler Lockett to be getting more snaps than Jack Besh or Dante Thornton. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't make any sense only because they're trying to get these guys onto the field and they're trying to get some action. But I understand where Pete Carroll was coming from. He wanted to put himself in the best position to win. It's a production-based business, and if you don't produce, you'll be out of business. And all you have to do is go back to yesterday and they relieve Pete Carroll of his duties. That'll prove my point, right? With that being said, everyone talks about Brady. Brady was asked, he's talked about Brady, and Spytek was asked about Brady a lot. And of course, Shantelle, as you mentioned, all the national media is Brady. Look, for anyone who thinks that Brady's not involved, I mean, just go back to the statement. The statement, if Brady was just, in Mark Davis's eyes, a minority owner that didn't have too much say, and maybe he'll give his thoughts on a potential quarterback, his name's not in the statement. His name's not in the statement about football operations. Like, that's a big deal. And I wouldn't walk away from $300-something million at Fox either. But I also would be in a position where I'd probably have to make a decision. What am I going to do? Do I want to be involved in football operations? Do I want to be just the minority owner where my name is attached to it, but I'm not involved? Because that's also my option. Because as Lincoln said, a minority owner is just a minority owner. So he could have said, like, hey, man, I appreciate that you guys want me to be heavily involved in this, but I've got a full-time gig with Fox that I don't think I have time to do this. Because, again, this is a full-time job. You can't just, I keep saying it, because we all can relate to it. You can't be weekend dad. You can't. You've got to be boots on the ground, roll up your sleeves, get busy. Brady was in the building all night long, all morning long, from Sunday overnight to Monday, right? And they were all working together. When I pulled up to the facility, and Link, you were there, there's about 5 or 6 black SUVs outside. I was like, okay, it's go time today. Clearly, that's what it is. So, again, at some point, if Brady's really going to be 10 toes down and be involved heavily in football operations, whatever you want to call him, GM, whatever, he has to make a decision, and it's going to be very hard to walk away from $300-something million. Nobody would make that easy decision.
Yeah, I don't know who would walk away from $300 million, but I will say this: I feel like his legacy is also on the line for some strange reason, because people want to know if he's going to be able to build a successful team. So that's another part of it. But on the other side, we're going to quickly dive into possible coaching candidates, but we're going to really get into the #1 overall pick. Also, the Raiders beat the Chiefs on Sunday. I'm telling you, it was a great 72 hours. Shout out to Link. But we'll get to that on the other side. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're seeing Link's dance moves. Maybe Q will show us his, because this is an exciting time for Raider Nation. This is an exciting time for Raider Nation. By the way, in that final segment, Q and Link are going to be taking some of your questions and comments. So if you're watching this on YouTube, drop them in the chat now. We'll see you on the other side. Raider Nation, keep it locked here on the Locked On Network. Finding a doctor you actually like can feel like discovering a diamond in the rough. You want someone in-network nearby with availability, but you also want a doctor who really listens, makes you feel comfortable, explains things clearly, and helps you walk out feeling confident about your next step. Your diamond in the rough doctor exists, and finding them easy with ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can choose someone you truly connect with. I love that you can search a specialty or symptoms and quickly find the right fit. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments. Go to ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL. to find and instantly book a doctor you love today. That's ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL. Thanks for ZocDoc for sponsoring this message. Welcome back, Raider Nation. Remember, if you like the content, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. So I know we're going to talk about this at nauseum, and I think by the next time we do this show on Thursday, there's already going to be rumors about who the Raiders are talking to, and we're probably going to have a couple of names, because right now the Atlanta Falcons already have a couple of names. They're eyeing Kubiak and Stefanski. So these after we're done the show, we're going to hear some names as well. But just in terms of Raiders being a destination, Las Vegas being a destination for coaches, not only do you have the number one overall pick, you have 10 picks. And I feel like this is a fresh slate for the Raiders, and they could go a bunch of different ways. Now, we still don't know, because John Spytek did also say he didn't really give too much information on who was going to be kept from the coaching staff. Like, they're still making decisions. Right. I'm sure they were still making decisions after that presser that you guys were both at. But when it comes to coaching candidates, are there any names that you're kind of looking at, and we've talked about this before and we'll talk about it later, but that really catch your eye? And how much do you feel that Vegas is the top destination? I feel like the Giants are as well, because they already have a quarterback. It's New York. You know how that market is. But in terms of Vegas being a destination and a couple of coaching candidates, who are you eyeing, Link? Like, who catches your eye?
Well, I'm going to have to defer to my boy Q, because he knows ball. And more importantly, here's my thing. I've always said my philosophy towards coaching is I want my head coach to be a manager and not a play caller. I don't want my head coach always looking down at his play sheet, making the next call or planning the next. I need you to manage the game. That is a big deal, especially in today's game. This is a very young and impressionable team. With that being said, and I know my feelings, put my feelings aside. That's why I'm going to defer to Q in a moment here. But that being said, I have to believe it's going to be offensive minded, because to me, it's not like you're going to. There's not like you're going to get a defensive coach like a Robert Saleh or something like that. A defensive minded coach who might want to come in and use that first pick on a defensive end or a shutdown corner or something like that. I don't foresee that. I know the Raiders need a franchise quarterback, so that's why I think they're going to be leaning towards offensive guys. Now, with that being said, I don't know much about those outstanding candidates that you see names thrown around. I never like to recycle coaches, but you also have to be aware of the new coach. You know, I live in Phoenix. Jonathan Gannon here has been in Arizona, just got released for 3 years. Couldn't turn this program around, and people were talking about their draft choices and where they went and how they did all that other stuff. So, you know, be careful of that sort of glimmer that's off in the corner of your eye. I don't know enough about it, but I do think they're going to be leaning to offensive line or offensive coach, not offensive line, offensive side coach. What do you think, Hugh?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I think it's going to be a wide net that's going to be cast when it comes to this coaching search. And I believe that, and this is the phrase that I've been trying to use, they're going to be aggressively patient while they go ahead and find this search. I don't think they're going to do like they've done the last few times where they narrow and lock in on one guy immediately. Last year, they locked in on Ben Johnson, and he was the guy that they were going to get. And Tom Brady just knew that he was going to get him because his name was Tom Brady. It didn't work. Then all of a sudden, it's like, uh-oh, now what? Which way do you pivot? Wait, hold on. Wait, they said no to Tom Brady? All right, now what? And then they ended up with Pete Carroll. Before that, it was Antonio Pierce. They were locked in on Antonio. Hell, I was locked in on Antonio Pierce, right? And so they went through the coaching, you know, the cycle and what you have to do, you know, the prerequisites, and then they hired AP, right? They locked in on Josh McDaniels pretty quickly, right? I don't think that they're going to do this. I think that they're going to interview offensive and defensive-minded guys. I'm with Link. I think that they'll probably end up with an offensive-minded guy, especially if they do decide that that's the direction they want to go as far as getting a franchise quarterback. But look, there's scenarios out there where they can go with the defensive-minded guy and get a sharp offensive coordinator, like the reports out there about possibly Brian Flores and Brian Daboll. And I don't know how big I would be on Flores just because of what happened last time. He had a rookie quarterback or young quarterback in Tua. That didn't work out very well in Miami, so I don't know how much he's grown from that. Not saying he hasn't, but I just don't know I haven't been around him enough to know. I haven't talked to enough people in Minnesota to see, kind of the temperature of him. But Brian Daboll did really well with Josh Allen, so I think that'd be a good OC. I know Cliff Kingsbury's name is floating around there. I like what he does early in the season. In the late in the season, not so much. I mentioned Kevin Stefanski. I think he's going to have a lot of interest around the league, not just for the Raiders, as websites write stories about this show and say put words in our mouths that aren't really necessarily true. So again, Kevin Stefanski will have interest around the league. I think he's going to probably end up with the Giants, but I think that he's a decent candidate. And then, of course, there's guys like Kubiak, as you mentioned, Shantelle, right? I mean, he's going to have a ton of interest, right? He's the offensive coordinator of Seattle in New Orleans last year. He started out the season really hot. He's going to be a good name. LaFleur with the Rams. He's the OC there, and he's in LA with the Rams. So anyone who has a cup of coffee with Sean McVay, they're automatically pushed to the front of the line as the next head coach, right? Even the defensive coordinator there, Chris Shula, excuse me. He's a guy that's a potential. So I think that there's a lot of guys out there that could be talked about and talked to. And I think that the Raiders are going to do that. I think that they're not going to just focus in and say, this is our guy. Let's go do everything we can, put the eggs in that basket and go get him. I think that they're going to listen to a bunch of guys, evaluate them, and again, find out who they can all be on the same page and all aligned with for this thing moving forward. And they've got to give them a long-term deal, and they've got to be patient. And that's something that they have not proven that they can do.
I think of just an added to what's important. Some of those names that are floating out there have lineage. When you talk about Shula, when you talk about Kubiak, and you're going, and I'm thinking back to Shanahan in San Francisco, and you talk about the fathers that have worked in the business before. I think that's a case to be talked about, because what the Raiders need is they need a program builder. They need somebody who's familiar. So that's why I'm standing clear of the first timers. Some of those new names, possible new head coaches, because they might not know how to do a program. As much as I love AP, I knew that AP was in over his head experience-wise, because he had so many other coaches, former head coaches, Tom Coughlin and all these other guys around him to help steer him, and still wasn't enough. So there's something to be said about experience. I think there's also something to be said about lineage, the possible lineage in your affiliation with guys that have worked in the league before, because the Raiders definitely need a program builder. So that's why the name is definitely a pop-up. It's alluring because you do have the first pick. And no matter what culture you are, you're dreaming a bit. Oh, if I had the first pick in this draft, would it be Mendoza? Would it be Dante Moore? Or what would I do with it? But I also go back to Kingsbury, because I was living in Phoenix when it happened. He drafted Kyler Murray. And I scratched my head I had dandruff coming out saying, Kyler Murray, that small guy, he's not going to last. And now you fast forward many years later, Arizona's looking to get rid of him. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're looking to move on from him because the experiment hasn't worked. This is a smaller quarterback that has been often injured. There's been times he shined. And of course, I remember that Raider game where it looked like he ran around 3 minutes before he completed the pass. And I was like, how do you stop that? But with that being said, there's been nothing more to it. So it's a really interesting dynamic on how Spytek and Brady are going to approach it.
Yeah, and you mentioned another team there, Arizona. They're looking for a candidate as well. And so when it comes to Vegas being a destination, you have the number 1 overall pick. Do you think that lure coaches to want to come and coach for the Raiders? Because I feel like when it came to a guy like Ben Johnson, I think the reason why he went to Chicago was because of Caleb. I think that was a big reason why he went there. Do you feel like that will lure some coaches to wanting to coach the Las Vegas Raiders? And do you believe it's a destination where maybe a Kevin Stefanski might be like, they have the number 1 overall pick, 10 picks, I might want to go here. Do you think we'll get bigger names because of that? Q?
I think so. I mean, I think that it's 1 to 32, right? And so, I mean, there's already, it's a very elite club if you're a head coach in the National Football League. But having the number 1 overall pick, having $100+ million in salary cap space, being able to handpick your quarterback, you're not strapped with the quarterback. In Atlanta, they have an opening. They're strapped with Michael Penix or Kirk Cousins. And Kirk Cousins wants out because he wants to be a starter somewhere. Okay, so Michael Penix is your quarterback. You take that job. That's your guy. And you might not, wherever you came from, you might not have been a big fan of Michael Penix in the draft process. In New York, they've got their quarterback in Jackson Dart. You might not have been a big fan of Jackson Dart. I think he's a good quarterback, but, who knows? Maybe I'm a head coach that was like, I don't think that's going to work. That's not really my cup of tea. All right, well, you're already strapped with that guy, right? I mean, you've got other openings. Arizona, they don't know what they're going to do with their quarterback. And they have the number 3 overall pick, so at least they have an opportunity. But like Atlanta, for example, they don't even have a first-round pick. So I've heard a lot of people say, hey, Atlanta's a great destination. Well, why? They don't have any salary cap space right now. And I know that they can do some gymnastics to get it done and clear up some space, but they don't even have a first-round pick. So now you're strapped with a quarterback that you might not like. You don't have a first-round pick. You have limited funds, right? I mean, all of a sudden you're looking at it like, So I think that the Raiders' job is a really good, attractive job. The only thing I think is a downfall and might give someone pause with taking this job, and I think it's very valid, and Lincoln's brought it up a few times, is stability. the stability has not proven to be there. They're saying the right things, but they haven't done the right thing. It's easy to say it, but you know what the old saying, talk about it and be about it. It's hard for them to be about it. They have not done that. And if I'm someone who's planning on getting my very first head coaching job, my first crack at it, and as you know, everybody is not always created equal. Everyone doesn't get a do-over. Everyone doesn't get a third time to be a head coach. Sometimes your first time is your only time. So if I'm going to take the crack at being a head coach and I'm going to move my family from the East Coast to Las Vegas to take on this challenge, and then 2 years into it, it's like, yeah, this ain't working, Q, you're out. Wait, what? Right? So that's why I think that whoever they hire, they're going to have to give probably a 5-year deal, and they're going to have to get out of the way and say, do you. Let's build this thing together, but we're going to give you the latitude to do this thing in your time and give you a real opportunity to build it. That's what I think is going to happen, and that's where I think that the job becomes a little unattractive because the track history of not having patience with the head coach is there. They've had 6 head coaches, right? I've been here in Vegas since 2021. They've had Gruden. They've had Bisaccia. They've had McDaniels. They've had Pierce. They've had Carroll. Now they're going to have another one. That the math don't math. So you have to be able to establish patience.
I have never been a head coach, but I did spend a couple of nights at a Holiday Inn Express, so I think I have a little bit of knowledge when it comes to these things.
There it is.
With that being said, Q hits the nail on the head, the stability. How can I be assured that the rug is not going to be pulled from under me? If I come in and take this job and I draft the class that I want to draft and I put it out there and we're not as successful because let's face it, the NFL has parity, but now the AFC West has parity, even more so with Denver and Chargers being viable. We know the Kansas City Chiefs aren't done with that Hall of Fame coach and that roster and Patrick Mahomes. So if I'm not as competitive, is the rug pulled from under me? Do I lose my job? And I've often said, nobody wants to get hired to get fired.
Exactly.
And you already own the fact that the Raiders are paying out 4 coaches, probably now 5.
I'd say
Exactly.
5 or 6 at this stage.
Yeah, exactly. So, with that being said, it's not about the money. It's about the stability. It's about being in the National Football League and being the focal point. And for some of these names that we're referring to, this will be their first head coaching gig.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to have a bad impression on your first time because that might affect your future. So with that being said, logically speaking, do you go with an experienced guy like you tried with Pete Carroll, which failed? Do you go with a new name guy who's hot and under the moment and modernized? And more importantly, where does that take your first pick? Because if you miss on this first pick, no matter what you do, you set yourself back 4 to 5 years.
If not more.
If not more, depending on how miserable. So with that being said, there are a lot of things that are at stake behind this one decision. Most importantly, if I got the phone call and somebody said, "Hey, Lincoln, you want to be a head coach?" I have to understand the dynamics of how much power do I have, how much control over the roster do I have, control over the coaching staff do I have, and more importantly, as Q talked about, how patient are you going to be able to be with me? Because this is not an overnight oats sensation where you can just mix in water and go and have the rest of your day. No, it doesn't work like that. There are a lot more intangibles to be figured out, and there are a lot more players to deal with. And today's players and personalities, look, I've been in a lot of locker rooms. I've been around a lot of players. I scratch my head about them like, dude, how are you playing on this level? When I hear some of the way these guys talk, think, and way they move. But that's what you have to deal with. That's what you have to play with. And a ultimate team game that is football, that's what you cannot avoid or stay away from. So there's a lot going on than just what we see on the surface.
Yep.
Yeah, and I just want to mention really quickly, I know a lot of names are being thrown out, but I feel like Flores and like Dable, that name has been thrown a lot. I feel like they're really serious. I don't know how that will be for like if you end up drafting a Mendoza, but at the same time, like the old Patriots guys, I feel like they never work out. And everyone wants to build like the Patriot regime. And it's like, it never works out. We tried that with Josh McDaniels. Great OC. I don't really think he's a great head coach, but that's a different conversation for another time. On the other side, we're going to be talking about the number 1 overall draft pick is Mendoza, the clear-cut number 1. So keep it locked here on the Locked On Network. You're watching or listening to the Raider Squad Show. Hey guys, the draft pick positions are set, and so many teams are looking for their franchise quarterback. Ever wish to become a pro quarterback getting drafted first overall by the Raiders? Well, now you can. There's a mobile game for you called the Ultimate Quarterback Football Legend. In this game, you step into the cleats of a #1 draft pick quarterback, and it's your job to lead your team to greatness. To help turn a failing franchise into a dynasty, this is the #1 quarterback career mode game on the mobile app stores, and it introduces the most realistic environment with full career control. Sign contracts, train and upgrade yourself, build chemistry and evolve your teammates, give input to your GM on roster moves, play the actual games in 2D, and rise through the ranks to become a pro football legend. You'll deal with the ups and downs of a quarterback career, from rookie nerves to playoff drama, and every choice shapes your journey. Ultimate QB is totally free to play, has no ads, and works 100% offline, perfect for when you want to sneak in a quick game or two on the go. Just head over to ultimate-quarterback.com. That's ultimate-qb.com, or search for Ultimate QB in your app store. And we've got something special for just you guys. If you use the promo code Locked On and Locked On in the game store, you'll get a free boost to start your career. That's Ultimate QB Football Legend. QB1, it's your legacy. All right, welcome back, Raider Nation. Remember, if you like the content, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Also, we appreciate you making the Raider Squad Show your second listen of the day and making the Locked On Raiders your first listen of the day. All right, so not only did the Raiders beat the Chiefs,
yes,
they secured the #1 overall draft pick just before that game. Shout out to the Giants for that one. But now the Raiders have the #1 overall pick. They have a bunch of power, and everyone's saying that Mendoza is that guy, right? And we're going to see him and Dante Moore face off against each other on Friday, which is going to be key. Yep. But is he the clear-cut #1 choice for going #1 overall? Or if you're the Raiders and you literally need to fill every position on the team, let's be serious here. They need as many picks as they can get. Would you consider trading back if you don't believe that Mendoza is that guy? Q, will go with you first.
Yeah, I leave all options open. I really do. I'm not set in stone on anybody. And I believe that Mendoza is a hell of a quarterback. And I think if the Raiders go with him, that's a great pick. I think that he's got it between the ears. He's got the leadership skills. He respects his teammates and puts them in a really good position. I think he's a really good quarterback, but it doesn't matter what I think, right? It matters who the next head coach is going to be, who the next offensive coordinator is going to be, what they feel like their vision with this team is, who their identity. Something that, Link, you talk about all the time. You can go 5, 6, 7 weeks into the season and still don't know what the Raiders' identity is. They've got to establish that and understand, does this guy fit with what we want to do? Does Dante Moore fit better if he so chooses to come out? Or is this not the class for us? Again, you're in a position of power. I would not at all rule out the possibility of the Raiders trading back. Actually, I think it's a pretty good, I'm not on FanDuel right now to check what the odds are. I would think it's a pretty good odd that they'll probably trade back, only because they need so many holes to fill. So again, I'm not advocating for them to do that. I just know for a fact that they have not decided that they're going to be, like I said, set in stone with one certain guy. If they do so choose to go with the quarterback #1 overall, keep it simple, the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. Yeah, Mendoza's the guy. He's got the size, he's got the arm, and he's got the intelligence, and that's all that you need, for that quarterback position, especially with the Raiders organization. So I would be great with him. But again, this is a process. And when we see, who they start interviewing, when we see who they actually eventually hire for the head coach, we'll have more clarity and better idea and understanding of what direction they're going to go. But I think all options are in the air right now.
The last few years, I've watched college football evolve to just free agency, a free agent frenzy.
Yep.
And I've seen many squads put together with just that one hit wonder, that 1 year where alumni or the people that contribute to these programs put in and they buy their best team, and you put them out there, and then everyone's on board for the big names. Oh my gosh, look at this guy, look at this guy, look at this guy. And next thing you know, you're in a position to where you're almost drafting a one hit wonder, because you don't know about the history, you don't know about the rise. And that's when you're in a desperate situation like the Raiders are right now. You're in that sort of frenzy, like, do we draft the hottest name? Or a lot of people that I've talked to really like Dante Moore more than Mendoza. Yep. But you can't rely on that because we don't know if Dante Moore is going to come out.
Right.
And I say that also
young, and he's very young.
And I also say that with the situation, I was reminded of the Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers situation where Eli refused to go to the Chargers because they were a disaster organization back then. And then you ended up seeing how all this stuff had happened and sort of settled. I say that to say this, Shantelle and Q. I don't know enough about Mendoza to say he's number one pick. I do know what I've heard in my ear over the last couple of weeks from the Raider Nation. Hey, Latino Mendoza, bring him. Oh, Los Raiders. You know what I'm saying? But at the same point, that doesn't make end all. It goes back to your evaluation period. I don't know if you're really set or you're really true on top of this is your guy of the future. I know they need a franchise quarterback.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people say, don't trade away that pick. Take that quarterback right then and there. But going again in your evaluation period, I go back to the hierarchy. General manager hires a head coach. Head coach hires our offensive coordinator or has a scheme in mind, picturing his quarterback. What is his ideal quarterback for the scheme in mind?
Right.
Is that quarterback available? Is that quarterback in this class? Doesn't have to be the number one overall pick. Doesn't have to be in the first round. But you want to make sure that your evaluation, you get it right. So there are many intangibles. And I just started watching college football in the sense where I'm evaluating talent. Before, because of my responsibilities with the league and the team, I didn't have to worry about the college players, evaluating college players. That was my responsibility. All I had to do was critique them when they got on the next level. But now that that's changed, I have to look at these guys more closely. And I can tell you that there have been some teams that have been put together, a truly free agent roster, where they went out and spent a boatload of money on these guys to be successful. And if they win a national champion, does that actually mean that they're the best players or the best team out there? Not necessarily. It also means who put a bunch of money in there. Texas Tech invested a ton of money into their football program. They got ran off the field.
Yeah, they did.
Oregon invested a ton of money in their football team. They're still in it, but you see how that's what the saga goes, and that's what I'm seeing again and again. So I'm not escaping the question. I don't know if Mendoza's the guy. If he is, obviously take him. But from my mindset, and again, going back to the way I perceive things, if you write your board and you have the best available players, you go down that board. And when those players are gone and you have that pick, like they did with Brock Bowers a couple of years, it made sense. We wanted a quarterback, couldn't get a quarterback. Okay, we go to the next best thing. Spytek wasn't there, but I'm saying it made sense. Or you could have the draft board needed. This is what my team needs, and I need to draft that way. So there's two different philosophies, there's two different outlooks. But if the quarterback is not there with that first pick, don't use it on the quarterback.
Right. That's been my biggest thing the whole time. Don't force it. Right. I know that the Raiders are quarterback thirsty. I get it, but you don't force it. Right. And again, I fully believe that Mendoza is a really good quarterback, and I definitely believe he can lead this Raiders organization. And I honestly, I think Tom Brady believes that too. Just hearing him talk about Mendoza on the broadcast, I do believe that he thinks that Mendoza is a really good quarterback. Again, I really just always go back to his leadership and having it between the ears. And I think that he really does. And I think this would be really good for the Raiders organization. But there's no reason to declare like that's the guy right now. I mean, it's early January, right? If for no other reason, just go ahead and make it look like you're gonna possibly trade back, or you're gonna go in a different direction, just to see what other organizations are willing to offer. And there's going to be organizations that are going to call. I say it all the time in work or whatever. You can always take that phone call. It doesn't mean you have to take the offer. You can always take the phone call and listen. Right, I'm always going to listen to anything anyone's got to say, but at the end of the day, I can choose to act on it or choose to say thanks, but no thanks. That's what a responsible organization will do, right? They'll evaluate it, like Lincoln said, and say, okay, this is our 5-year plan, our 10-year plan. Is this guy part of it? Can he take us where we need to be in this certain amount of time? Yes. All right, boom, check. There he is. He's the guy. Or, we're not quite sure. If you're not quite sure on the guy, don't force it. Because, again, the Raiders aren't just one quarterback that they need. They need a lot on this roster. So if you decide that trading back makes more sense so you can pick up a couple extra picks, extra first round of this year, extra first round of next year, so be it. That's a decision that you have to make. But you also have to make sure that you get it right. And the one thing I'll caution is we heard in the whole draft process, and I love the draft, we heard all the way up to the 2025 draft, yeah, this ain't the draft for quarterbacks. But 2026 is going to be loaded. If you want a quarterback, that's the draft for you. And now that we're going into 2026 draft, they're like, 2027 now that might be the draft of all drafts with quarterbacks. Well, that's what I heard last year. So are we going to get to this stage next year and they'd be like, well, this guy didn't really perform like we thought. This guy took a step back. This guy's going back to college. NIL makes more money. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's no guaranteeing that this pool is going to be bigger and better next year. That's what they say. That's what the people that are smarter than me, that slept in, better beds than me at a fancy hotel say, right? That's what they say, but there's no guarantee until we actually see it. So if you do have belief in this guy Mendoza or more, or whatever the case may be, then by all means go get him. And that's the reason that you have the number 1 overall pick. You have those options in front of you.
And I agree, Mendoza's having a tremendous run. The Heisman Trophy winner, probably going to win a national championship. In Indiana, I didn't expect coming into the season was going to be the team that they were. I mean, I didn't put any money down on them on futures, possibilibilities. But with that being said,
don't worry, she did.
She took care of it. That's why sister's on the show. She handles it that way, like that. But my thing is this: is beware of the glamour and the glitz, because Mendoza is a capable quarterback. I'm not saying that he's not Heisman Trophy winner, but again, I'm reminded of Heisman Trophy winners. How many teams has Baker Mayfield been on after he was the number 1 overdraft choice? So, I mean, and he finally found a home in Tampa, but he was a journeyman around the league. Yep. So was it the disaster in Cleveland that tainted him for other teams until he found a home? These are all things that you have to be aware of. Don't ignore history. You pay attention to it for a certain fact so you don't repeat it, but just go through your proper evaluation. And honestly, if you're in a position of power where you have the call to make that pick, make the pick that your heart is deadly set on. This is what I know, I believe, and I'm going to stand by, because in a lot of times in talking about head coaches, that might be determining your future as well.
And I think that's the thing. We don't know if Dante Moore is going to enter the draft. He's got to let us know by next week if he's going to be entering the draft. And I also think when we watch the game on Friday night, we're going to actually see the differences between Dante Moore and a guy like Fernando Mendoza. I will say one thing, though. If the Raiders aren't sure, they're saying this is a 1 quarterback draft. That's what all the analysts are saying. There's 1 quarterback in this draft that you have to go and get, and it's Fernando Mendoza. Now, here's the thing. If he's the 1 quarterback, the Jets need a quarterback. Miami might need a quarterback. The Steelers might need a quarterback. There's a lot of teams. Arizona, exactly. There's a lot of teams that might need a quarterback. There was a quarterback named Trey Lance, and they gave up King's ransom for him. I don't know how much it was. It was like 3 first-rounders or something like that.
A lot.
And so if everyone's saying next year is the draft of quarterbacks, and you could possibly get 3 first-rounders, and you need to fill every position on the Raiders. Like, let's be serious here. The Raiders need a whole lot of everything. Yeah. Would you consider trading back? Because if you're not sold on Fernando Mendoza, and here's the only thing that I will say is that I watched a lot of Mendoza in Cal, and I watched a lot of Mendoza at Indiana. He's a great quarterback, but I don't think he's a generational quarterback. Right. Not that you need that in the NFL.
I'm glad you brought up Cal. Let's not forget the Cal tape. The Cal tape wasn't Heisman Trophy tape. Let's just put it out there, right? Everyone's sold on Mendoza, and I like I said, I believe he's a really good quarterback, and he can get it done, and I think he'd be good for the Raiders, but I'm not ignoring the Cal tape, right? The Cal tape does exist.
And let's just be serious here. Indiana was able to scout. Indiana was able to use nil. Indiana was able to do a lot of things to put the best players around Fernando Mendoza. When he comes to the Raiders, that might not be the case, because the Raiders need to fill everything, and we'll see what happens during free agency. But if they're able to trade back and get 3 first-rounders or get something crazy, would you think about doing it? Because the Raiders need so many positions. And it's not to say you can't draft a quarterback later in the rounds. We talked about, Mr. Irrelevant. He went last in the draft, and that's Brock Purdy. You might not need a generational talent. And a lot of people are comparing Mendoza to be like a Matt Ryan. And Matt Ryan was a good quarterback. I mean, he took the Falcons to the Super Bowl, right? Yeah. But if that is the ceiling, do you go all in? Link, just your thoughts really quickly.
Well, I mean, look, again, it goes back to your evaluation. But if Tom Brady is involved, look at where Tom Brady was drafted. So he should have some influence in the fact that you don't need to be a top pick to be a good quarterback. It goes back to your evaluation. I haven't seen enough Mendoza. I really didn't. And I can't say that he is that top pick. So it goes back to your evaluation. But I think all things are possible, because Raiders, as you said, Shantelle, and we've said all along, they're not 1 player away. They're many players away.
Right. And again, he's I don't want anyone to take it wrong. I do think he's a really good quarterback. I'm trying to make sure I specify that, because, man, if you say one thing is negative, people will lose their mind. Oh, my gosh. No, it's just part of the evaluation process. You've got to look at the whole thing, the whole body of work. There wasn't too many that were talking about Mendoza. And, I've seen a couple comments. Yeah, he wasn't playing with, great stars at Cal. That's fine. But the turnover-worthy throws were still there. Right. I don't care if you're playing with a 1-star or 2-star. When you turn the ball over, and there was a lot of turnovers at Cal, it happened. right? But he has played at a very high level. It's the reason why he won the Heisman Trophy at Indiana, and it's the reason why they haven't lost the game. That's the reason why they beat Penn State at the end, because he threw a hell of a pass at the back of the end zone. That was an incredible play. It's the reason why they knocked off Ohio State. There's a reason why they beat the brakes off Alabama. And trust and believe, as a guy that yells Roll Tide, they beat the brakes off of Alabama, and they'll probably beat the brakes off of Oregon on Friday. But obviously, we got to see what it looks like. They played once earlier. The weather was terrible in Oregon. They found a way to get that win. I think that this is going to be a great game on Friday. Those are the two best QBs, clearly. When it comes to Mendoza and Moore, we'll see what ends up ultimately happening. He's a really good quarterback, and I think that the Raiders could win with them. But they have to make that decision, and we don't even know who their head coach is going to be.
Yeah, lots of questions, and we're going to get into it on the Squad Show throughout the year. I mean, this is the best time to be a Raiders fan, because now we're going to get into free agency. The chips are going to fall. The Raiders have to hire a coach first and then probably go into free agency. So we're going to see a lot of things happen. But coming up on the other side, questions and comments with Link and Q. If you got any questions and comments, you're watching this on YouTube, drop them in the chat. We might get Chicano Link on the other side. So keep it locked here on the Locked On Network. You're watching or listening to the Raiders Squad Show. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better every Friday night before the game tips off. FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with the NBA Happy Hour. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour. Every Friday from 6 to 7:30 Eastern, a little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, welcome back, Raider Nation. Let's get to questions and comments with Link and Q. And I actually want to get to this one. I thought this was interesting from Casanova. Question for Q and Link. Any news or timeline on whether we recoup any money owed to Christian Wilkins?
Last I heard on that is that's a TBD. I don't want to say trial. That sounds too criminal, but it's, some kind of hearing on that. That's what I heard. I don't know a whole lot about it. I always refer to our guy Vinny Bonsignor, who's kind of been on that. There's going to be some conversations that are going to be had. It was interesting though that no team sniffed Christian Wilkins all year long, right? He just kind of sat there. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, but that'll be determined. I think pretty soon once the season gets wrapped up.
And as a former union rep, the union is going to step in to help defend Christian's rights as a player, and rightfully so. So they got to go through that whole evaluation process and figure out, probably end up finding some sort of settlement in between, because that's how most of these big things work, these big type of deals work. But yeah, there's a lot to still be decided.
Why didn't we go to the union rep to begin with? I don't know what I'm doing.
Like I said,
what are you hanging out with these fine folks for? You get out the way.
All right, let's go to LDub 6453. If we draft O-line, we won't compete again this year. I disagree. I think the Raiders need to focus on the O-line a little bit. Just your thoughts. Do you feel like that's one of the major issues, obviously, in an area that the Raiders need to focus on, Link?
Without a doubt. And I actually think they're going to overspend in free agency, which I don't have a problem with.
That part.
I think it's, there are coaches out there who believe that you can develop guys. I don't. I want to see people who are draft worthy. I've seen enough offensive line play throughout this college football season to see guys that, okay, I can see something behind it. Today's game is extremely different. And I was talking with several coaches, the fact that I watched college football and I saw a team on the 6-inch line go from shotgun. That is embarrassing to me. Okay. Yeah. But that's today's game. I see the fact is that for most of the offensive linemen that I watched in college football, they don't know how to block. They do what I call hinder. They just get in the way. I'm just slowing you down because the ball's going to be gone. I saw a lot of that from teams like Oklahoma, SC, some of the bigger teams throughout the season. So there's a lot to be desired there. I'm an old slobber knocker. I want to go out there and punch you in the face and kick you in the throat. That's how I play. But I don't see a lot of that. So with that being said, I don't know if the draft, though they do need a franchise lineman. There's no doubt in my mind. They do need a franchise tackle, without a doubt. But I don't know if you can rely on the draft. So I think you're going to overspend in free agency, might address it in the draft. But whoever that draft pick that you take, wherever you take them, put their asses out in the football field and let them play.
That's the biggest key for me is that's where the money should be focused in on. You got all that salary cap space. It's so funny hearing people say, well, you can't draft a quarterback because of the offensive line. No, I mean, you can actually address both this offseason, right? You can go and get Fernando Mendoza in April. You can go get offensive linemen in March, right? I mean, you can go and do that in salary cap. I mean, you have plenty of cap space. You can go get Linderbaum from Baltimore and be your center. You can go and grab a couple more offensive linemen. You can easily get 3 new starters on that offensive line and work with Colton Miller. And you have Caleb Rogers that could be part of competition, and Charles Grant and DJ Glaze. Like, all of a sudden you can JPJ, right? You've got all these guys. You can do that. I think that's going to be the number one point of emphasis. I think that's going to be the biggest priority in free agency. I would not be shocked when free agency opens up that those are the first moves that you see the Raiders make is go out and get some big hoggies, as Fernando Mendoza calls them, and I respect that.
Yeah, for sure. Raider Nation, by the way, we'll be back on Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Pacific time, 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. And if you have questions and comments for Link, you can always drop them on YouTube or hit us up on Twitter, and we'll be able to get to them on another episode. So we got the number 1 overall pick, and now the Raiders are searching for a coach. I'm pretty sure on Thursday we're going to have some information on who the Raiders are eyeing. So we'll be back on Thursday, y'all. Thanks so much for rocking out with us. And obviously, thanks so much for supporting the show. We'll see you on Thursday morning.